This is part 3 of the Craftsman Emerson Gen 4 Rebuild series. If you haven't seen part 2, click the link at the top of the screen. In this video, we'll be tearing down the motor and then soaking the parts. Hello everyone, I'm Jeff and welcome to my shop. We got a lot to cover, so let's get to it. The linked owner's manual does not have a really good parts diagram, so I'm linking this parts diagram as well. So the first thing we're going to do is remove the motor pulley from the shaft. There's a set screw that we're going to remove. And once we have that out of there, and since everything on this drill press is rusted, we're going to shoot some PB Blaster down in here and inside that bore that we pulled the set screw out of. And then we'll see just how tight this pulley is on the shaft. Just give it a slight little pry, and it moves pretty good and comes off of there. So, yay! Then we've got that Woodruff key we need to get off of there. Next, we're just going to test the motor, make sure it runs. And it does. And we're listening for that click. And next, we're going to remove the motor from the motor cage. So there are these screws and brackets on both ends of it. And this screw is really rusted inside the nut, so and I'm separating all these parts because we're going to be soaking them. And if you look at the motor, you'll see a yellow cap. That is an oil port, and there's one on each end of the motor. And that's because this motor has sleeve bearings, and I think I forget later on showing you that I pull those out before we soak these parts, but you just need to remove them so that you can clean all the sleeve bearing stuff up when we soak it. So once we've got the motor separated from the cage, we're going to go ahead and disassemble the motor mount cage assembly. And there are these 4 bolts with nuts on them and washers. And they're well rusted. And then we've got the 2 nuts and the cone point set screws. Then we finish removing the other bolts. And now those parts are disassembled. Next, we're going to remove the capacitor, so we have to get the capacitor cover off. It has 2 screws on it. And then we can get the capacitor out of the cover. And then we're just going to use a screwdriver and make sure that capacitor is discharged. And I like marking the capacitor. It's probably not polarized, but I mark it regardless. And then I'm going to mark each one of those wires as we disconnect them from the capacitor. And they're just blade terminals, so they pop off of there. And just like the power panel, if this is the first time you've ever done something like this, take lots of pictures before you start disassembling wires and make sure you mark everything. So now we're removing the terminal cover, which is rusted in place. And once we get the cover off of there, you should see all the wiring. So we'll go ahead and undo the ground and disconnect the leads to the power cord. And we'll mark all of those where they're connecting on the terminal bar. Or I think in this parts diagram it's called the switch assembly. Next we're going to remove the long screws. So there are 4 of these, and each one of them has a nut on the end. After we get those off, we can go ahead and remove the end shields. So we'll start tapping these. And then rotate. Open that gap up a little bit. And then tap the shield again. And you just got to work your way around it until it comes loose like that. Once we've got one end that we can get out of there, this is the non-terminal end. And we have some parts that are on the shaft here. And how they're on there, the order that they're in, is important. So I'm going to lay them out here. There's also a rubber washer on the inside of the end frame or shield assembly. And you can see the sleeve bearing in there. And there is a retaining ring on the shaft. And those are the parts that you're going to need when you reassemble everything. So now we can get the rotor out of there. There it goes. And on the terminal side of the rotor, you have roughly the same setup. Another retaining ring. Like so. There's also another rubber washer inside that end frame, the terminal end frame. But we're going to go ahead and disassemble the, on most motors, this is called the governor. On this motor, it's called the actuator assembly. So it has two springs. Once we've got those springs off, then we can slide the two governors on each end out of there. And then the center plastic piece. Now that white plastic piece, or off-white plastic piece, actually comes off of the shaft as well, but we're going to leave it on there. So here we are at the terminal end. We'll go ahead and fish those wires into the inside of the motor. And we're going to remove the screws that hold the terminal bar. Oh, there's that rubber washer I was talking about. There's two screws here. And like I said, this terminal bar is actually called the switch assembly in the parts diagram because you can see it has the switch built into it. And there's the terminal end frame, or shield. So next we're just going to start disconnecting the wiring, and we're going to record where all that wiring goes. And mark each wire. You can see I got a little diagram going on down there in the bottom left-hand corner. So we're going to be soaking all of the metal parts in simple green, but no electronics and no data panels or anything that has graphics on them, because simple green will strip paint. I've got a big bin here that I'm just going to put all the parts in. And the small parts I'll put in wire strainers, wire mesh strainers, so that they don't get lost all around inside there. Once we've got all that in there, we can go ahead and start filling it up with simple green. So I buy these, I think they're 2.5 gallon things of simple green from Home Depot. That's like the cheapest price I've seen. And I just buy a bunch of them. Now I reuse my simple green, and I'll show you in a little bit how we reclaim that, but yeah, this will remove most of the oil and the grease and the grit from most of this stuff. So 24 hours later, we can come back and reclaim the simple green. So I've got this battery powered siphon that you can get from Harbor Freight. It's like $5. And then I've got a funnel, and I use a 150 micron strainer, paint strainer. I think it's 150. And I just strain the simple green through that. And I'll refill all of those jugs. And then I'll leave the last probably inch inside this bin and throw it away, because that'll contain most of your contaminants. So after that's done, then we'll pull each part out and rinse them off and wire brush them. Just like you see here. Now, most of the paint is still on most of these parts, so we're going to have to do some paint stripping. But before we get to that, we're going to soak the column in simple green. So I've got a piece of 4-inch pipe with, or PVC pipe with a cap on the end of it. We'll slide the column down in there. Be careful not to bust that cap off the end. Then we'll stand it up. We'll strap that to that column there. And then I kept the nasty simple green from the bin. And I filled up a 5-gallon bucket with that. And so when we're done with soaking the column, we're just going to throw that simple green out. But we'll dump it in here. And we'll let the column soak for 24 hours. And make sure that's filled all the way up. All right. So these are the parts as they are right now. You can see they're all very rusty still. And we're going to go through and figure out what we need to strip the paint off of. So we need to remove the vinyl covers on those parts there. And these vinyl covers should just come off of there. They're on pretty good, but you just twist them and pull on them at the same time, they'll come off. Like so. All right, next we're going to be using Citrus Strip. I like this stuff because it works great. It's non-toxic. And it does not have a strong odor, so you can use it indoors. and we'll just apply it with a brush. So this gets real messy, but it works. So it's how we do things. For these smaller parts, when we go to remove the paint stripper 24 hours from now, we'll just use a wire brush to do it. For the larger parts, like the head and the base and the table, I'm going to use a power washer. So obviously we've got to get this stuff everywhere. So getting the inside of the head casting is challenging, but yeah, not too bad. So after we've got everything coated, we're going to need to wrap these parts with the saran wrap. And then let them sit for 24 hours. And this will keep the citrus strip from drying, and it'll give it the time it needs to do what it needs to do. Separate the paint from the part. And we'll be cleaning up a lot of these parts with a wire wheel later on as well. So any paint that's left on them, even after stripping them, we'll be able to remove with the wire wheel. But pretty simple and pretty inexpensive as well. And it works really, really good. Well, like I said, we're going to let that sit for 24 hours. And then we'll come back and start removing the paint. So that's going to wrap up this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like and subscribe. And be sure to check out the various links that are in the description of the video. And in the next video, we'll be removing the paint stripper and de-rusting parts. So, as always, I appreciate the support, and I will see you next time.